It had started much earlier, first thing in the morning, when Clara was still organizing patient charts for her shift, and Dr. Sterling walked past the nursing station without looking at her, as if she were part of the wall, part of the furniture, part of the collection of things that existed to serve and didn't need to be seen. She had said, "Good morning." He hadn't responded. Two other doctors passing behind him replied out of reflex, without stopping, without paying attention. But Richard didn't. Richard passed, picked up a document from the counter, leafed through it quickly, and returned it with a dry paper snap, as if the gesture itself were a comment on the quality of her work. "This is incomplete," he said without looking. "Redo it." Clara took the document, checked it. It was complete. Every field filled, every signature in the right place. She went after him. "Dr. Sterling, the report is, I said it's incomplete." He didn't stop, didn't turn. He continued walking down the hallway as if she hadn't spoken, as if her voice were background noise that didn't warrant a response. Teresa, who had seen everything from the station, waited for Richard to disappear through the back door before approaching. "Let it go," she said in a low voice. "The report is correct. I know it is." Teresa looked at the empty hallway. "But with him, it doesn't matter." Clara looked at the document in her hand, took a deep breath, and put it back in the folder. That had happened at 7:20 a.m. At 9:17, the same man would be screaming her name in the hospital's busiest hallway. The situation that triggered everything was simple, direct, and completely beyond Clara's control. A patient had arrived without a referral, outside of outpatient clinic hours, demanding an immediate consultation. Clara had followed protocol, explained the correct procedure, advised on necessary documentation, offered to reschedule. The patient had left dissatisfied, had called to complain, and the complaint had landed directly on Richard's desk. Teresa warned her. Clara listened. She knew the procedure by heart. She had done everything right. But when Richard entered the floor that morning, it wasn't procedure he wanted to discuss. It was power. "Was it you who left the patient in room 4 unattended?" he said, barely stopping at the station. "He arrived without a referral," Clara replied calmly. "I followed the protocol established by the administration. I didn't ask what you did. I asked if it was you." "Was it?" Richard took a step forward. His voice rose 2 tones. "Then you're the problem, not the protocol. You." Clara didn't avert her gaze, clutched her clipboard tighter, but said nothing. She maintained her breath, her posture, and that silence of hers, that refusal to bend, to apologize for something she hadn't done wrong, to diminish herself to make him feel bigger. It was that which ignited something in him. He started walking. "Follow me." She should have suspected when he turned into the main corridor instead of heading to the administrative office. The main corridor was the longest in the hospital, the most visible. Doctors, residents, technicians, administrative staff, patient families, and ambulatory patients passed through there. It was the corridor that connected everything: the entrance, the elevators, the floors, the entire life of Maplewood General in constant motion. Richard stopped in the middle of it, turned to Clara, and pointed his finger. "This kind of attitude has no place here," he said, his voice echoing through the entire corridor. "You act as if you know more than your superiors, as if the rules don't apply to you." "Dr. Sterling, I just followed the 'don't interrupt me.'" The corridor stopped. Not metaphorically, it literally stopped. Footsteps ceased, conversations died, movement suspended as if someone had pressed a button. A mother walking with a child leaned against the wall. 2 residents coming from the other side slowed their pace and stood still, unsure whether to continue or retreat. A nursing assistant near the water cooler held her cup without drinking, staring. No one spoke, no one moved. And far back, almost at the end of the corridor, near the elevators, a man in a white lab coat also stopped. He wasn't in a hurry, didn't have the expression of someone who had just arrived and didn't understand what was happening. He stood with a specific stillness, the kind of stillness of someone who understood everything at once and was controlling what to do with it. No one paid attention to him. Everyone was looking at Clara. "Get your things and get out," Richard repeated, this time louder. His finger still pointed, his voice occupying every inch of that corridor. "You are fired today, right now." The phrase bounced off the glass walls and returned. Clara felt the air leave her lungs all at once. She felt the weight of every gaze, of every suspended breath around her, of every person witnessing it, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. Not when the man yelling was the chief of staff, and the woman receiving it was a young nurse whom no one truly knew. She looked at him for a second, just a second. Then she lowered her head, turned her back, and started walking. Behind her, She heard a whisper. 2. She couldn't distinguish the words, only the tone, that low, embarrassed tone of someone who had just seen something they couldn't pretend they hadn't. Teresa went after her as soon as they rounded the corner. "Clara, you can't just let this happen. He doesn't have the authority to." "He does," Clara replied in a low voice. "Here, he does what he wants. But you didn't do anything wrong. I know. Just that." 2 words, spoken with a calm that Teresa couldn't understand, because it wasn't the calm of someone who wasn't feeling. It was the calm of someone who was feeling too much and had decided at that exact moment not to let it show there. Not there. Not like that. In the locker room, Clara slowly opened her locker, took her jacket, took the small notebook she always carried, stood still for a moment, looking at her ID badge hanging on the locker door. Clara Monte, nurse, Maplewood General Hospital. She took off the badge, held it in her hand for a moment, just a moment, before putting it in her bag. She left through the service corridor. She didn't want to see anyone else. She didn't want anyone to see her like that. With that heavy thing in her chest that she was holding so tightly, it truly hurt. She pushed open the back door. The sun hit her face all at once, and that's when the tears came. Quick, hot, silent. She leaned against the wall outside, away from the windows, away from the cameras, away from everyone, and let go. She let go because she needed to let go, because holding on has a limit, and she had reached it. She cried for the pointed finger, for the voice that had echoed through the corridor, for every gaze that had averted when it should have stayed, for every morning she had arrived early and stayed late, and done everything right without anyone needing to ask. She cried for all of it for 2 minutes. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a deep breath once, twice, 3 times, stood up, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and looked at the empty parking lot in front of her. She took out her cell phone, looked at the screen for a moment before dialing. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" said the voice on the other end. Masculine, calm, but there was something in that calm, a layer beneath it that Clara knew, and that now sounded different. "I need to tell you something," she said. A short silence. "Go ahead. They fired me." She paused, in the worst possible way. Another pause. Shorter this time, almost imperceptible, but Clara noticed. "I understand." "He just said that?" "No." "What?" "No. Not the natural surprise of someone hearing news for the first time. I understand." Clara was quiet for a second. "Are you okay?" she asked, not knowing exactly why she was asking him that when it was she who had been humiliated. "I am," he replied. "And you?" "I will be." A long pause. The kind of pause that exists between people who don't need to fill the silence. But this time there was something different within it. A small, almost invisible tension that Clara couldn't name. "I'll see you later," he said. "Okay." She hung up, looked at the phone in her hand. There was something strange about that call, something she couldn't quite identify. Not in what he had said, but in what he hadn't said. In the speed with which he had understood, in the tone that wasn't of surprise. She shook her head, put the phone away, and started walking towards the parking lot exit. Back in Maplewood General Hospital's main corridor, the man in the white lab coat, who had stood still at the back, was still standing. He waited for Clara to disappear through the back door. Then he looked at the corridor in front of him, at the place where Richard had yelled, where people had stopped, where that embarrassed silence had lasted too long. He looked for a long moment and then walked towards the elevators with slow steps and an expression no one in that hospital would be able to read. Not yet. The envelope was on the desk when Richard arrived. No sender, no stamp, just his name written by hand, in firm script, in the center of the cream paper. He threw his bag on the chair, loosened his tie, and looked at it for a moment. There was no cause for concern. Envelopes arrived all the time. Communications from administration. Internal memos. Correspondence from suppliers. He opened it without haste. He read it, then read it again. The third time he read it standing, the paper inches from his face, as if proximity could change what was written. It didn't change. Dr. Richard Sterling, your position as Chief of Staff at Maplewood General Hospital is under immediate review. Attend the 5th floor boardroom today at 2 p.m. Do not be late. No signature, no title, no explanation. He put the paper on the desk, looked out the window. Outside, the parking lot was full. The hospital's operations continued normally. The world hadn't stopped, but something inside that room had changed. Richard spent the entire morning trying to find out who had sent that envelope. He asked his secretary. She didn't know. He asked his administrative assistant. He didn't know either. He called human resources, and heard a tight voice on the other end, saying they had no information to provide at that moment. No information to provide. In 12 years at that hospital, no one had ever said that to him. He went back to his office and paced. He thought about the day before. He thought about the nurse. He thought about the corridor, the shouting, the people standing and watching. The times he had done similar things and no one had said anything. No one had lifted a finger. No one had sent any envelope. He thought, this will pass. And he went to lunch. At exactly 2 p.m., Richard entered the 5th floor boardroom. The table was long, with dark leather chairs on both sides. Only one person was seated, a man Richard didn't immediately recognize, now in a gray suit, no lab coat, no ID badge, with a closed folder in front of him, and an expression that was neither anger nor judgment, but decision. Richard scanned his face with his eyes, trying to recall council meetings, hospital events, administrative corridors. Nothing. He didn't know that man. Please sit, the man said. Richard sat, looked around. He expected more people. A committee. Some formal process with minutes and witnesses. There was only that man. Who are you? Richard asked. The man opened his folder before replying. He calmly slid a sheet across the table, without haste, without any confrontational gesture. Richard looked at the sheet. It was a transcript. Typed words line by line, with time and location recorded at the top. Main corridor, 3rd floor, 9:17 a.m. He recognized the words before finishing the first paragraph. They were his. He looked up at the man. My name is Gabriel Monti, the man said. I own Maplewood General Hospital. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. 3 seconds during which Richard tried to fit the name, the face, some memory of a meeting or document or photograph in the corridors. Nothing. I didn't know that, he began. I know you didn't, Gabriel interrupted without raising his voice. That's precisely the point. The meeting was short, direct, with no room for negotiation. Gabriel presented the testimonies, 11 employees who had been present in the corridor. He presented the CCTV footage. He presented the protocol Clara had followed, stamped by the administrative department, confirming that the procedure was correct. Richard tried twice. The first time, he said it had been a moment of pressure. The second, that the employee had disobeyed previous orders. Gabriel listened to both versions without interrupting. Then he placed another sheet on the table. You are suspended from your duties as chief of staff while an internal audit is conducted, he said. The employee will be reinstated with immediate effect. This is disproportionate, because of a sit-down. Richard had stood up without realizing it. Gabriel's voice hadn't risen. There was no visible anger, no threat in his tone. There was only that specific firmness of someone who doesn't need volume, because decisions have already been made. Richard sat down, and it was at that moment, in that silence after the chair, that he looked at the man in front of him with real attention for the first time. He tried to read something in that face, some satisfaction, some pleasure of someone exercising power. He found none of that. He found something that was almost worse. Controlled indifference. The kind that isn't coldness. It's distance, maintained with effort. Richard didn't understand what he was seeing, but he felt there was something there he couldn't access. That night, Clara was on the balcony when she heard the key in the lock. She hadn't turned on the light. She had been sitting in the dark with a cup of tea that had gone cold and undrunk, looking at the city lights below, thinking, or trying not to think, both at the same time, the way it happens when your head won't stop, but also goes nowhere. She heard footsteps down the corridor. Footsteps she knew, the rhythm, the weight, the small pause before turning the corner, that pause that always existed, as if he needed half a second to prepare for whatever came next. He stopped at the balcony entrance. Clara didn't turn. She kept looking at the lights below, feeling his presence at the door, listening to the silence between them, which was charged in a way different from normal. It wasn't their usual comfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who know they need to speak and are still choosing their words. You weren't sleeping? He finally said. It wasn't a question. I couldn't, she replied. He crossed the balcony, sat in the chair next to her. Not too close, not too far, just as always, which was their way. Clara looked at the cup in her hand. The tea had been cold for a long time. How was your day? She asked. A small pause. Long, he said. She nodded, stayed quiet. There was something she wanted to ask. She felt the question formed, ready, waiting on the edge. But there was also something holding her back, as if asking would open a door that, once opened, wouldn't close the same way again. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm trying to be." He looked at her sideways. She felt his gaze, but didn't turn. "What happened was unfair," he said. "Simple, direct, unadorned. I know. And you left there with your head held high." She finally turned to him. There was something in that sentence. It wasn't praise, it was an observation, the kind only made when seen up close. "How do you know how I left?" she asked. The question came out before she thought, and when it did, it hung in the air between them in a way she didn't expect. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the city lights, stayed quiet for a time that was too long to be normal and too short to be forgotten. "You told me," he finally said. "On the call." Clara stared at him. She hadn't said that on the call. She had said they had fired her in the worst possible way. She hadn't described how she had left, hadn't said anything about the corridor, about her posture, about the glances around her. She had only said that. And he had said, "I understand," too quickly, as if he already knew. She kept looking at his profile, his chin slightly raised, his eyes on the city, his hands on his knees with that stillness she knew too well not to notice when it was being used as protection. "Gabriel," she said slowly. He turned to her, and there was something in that look. Not guilt, not a lie, something more akin to a choice. The expression of someone deciding at that exact moment how far they would go. "Sleep," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." "Tomorrow, really?" Calmly. Clara looked at him for a long moment. There were so many questions. There was one in particular that kept returning, that she couldn't stop formulating, that pulsed with an insistence she didn't know if it was intuition or imagination. But she was tired, and he was there. And there was something in that presence, in his way of sitting beside her without needing to explain anything, that was, despite everything, the safest thing she knew. She got up, picked up the cold cup, stopped at the balcony door. "Were you honest with me today?" she asked without turning. Silence. 3 seconds. "I was honest in what I said," he replied. She noticed what he hadn't said. In what he said, not in everything. She went inside, leaving the door ajar. Lay down in the dark, looking at the ceiling, with that phrase slowly spinning in her head, like a song that won't leave. "I was honest in what I said." Outside on the balcony, Gabriel stayed a while longer, looking at the city with the expression of someone carrying something it wasn't yet time to put down. The morning after the meeting, Clara was already in uniform. She entered through the main corridor with her new badge pinned to her uniform and her head held high. Each step cost something, not because she was afraid, but because everyone stopped to look. Not in the same way they had looked 2 days before, when Richard was pointing his finger in her face. This time, the gazes were different. They were the kind that analyze, that calculate, that try to understand what this woman is doing back here, after being expelled in front of everyone. Some averted their eyes when she passed, others didn't. Clara went directly to the third-floor nursing station, put her bag in her locker, took her clipboard, checked the schedule. She did everything as if it were a normal day, as if the corridor incident of 2 days ago had happened to someone else. Teresa was at the station. She looked at Clara with an expression that mixed admiration with anguish. "How are you doing this?" Teresa asked in a low voice. "Doing what?" "Standing up." Clara didn't answer. She picked up the first chart and went to the first patient's room. The morning flew by. Work helped. As long as there were tasks, there was focus. As long as there was focus, the pain stayed outside, waiting. It was during the break that the problem began. Clara was in the break room when she heard voices outside. They weren't loud. They were the kind of voices people use when they think they're not being heard, but they are. She's back, because her husband owns the place. Clara stopped. No one confirms it, but everyone knows. Why else do you think Richard was suspended the same day? But no one knew she was married to him. Exactly. She's been hiding in here like a spy, working as a nurse while being the owner of the place. A low laugh. Imagine the situation for the others. If you disagree with her now, you disagree with the owner's wife. Clara put her cup in the sink. Slowly, quietly. She left the break room without looking around. The information had leaked. She didn't know how, she didn't know who, but it had leaked, and quickly, the way things leak inside a hospital, where corridors have ears and message groups operate 24 hours a day. Before lunch, she already felt the difference throughout the entire floor. Colleagues who used to greet her naturally now did so with excessive caution, the kind that hurts more than indifference. A new technician she barely knew changed her path to avoid crossing her in the corridor. A resident doctor who always asked for help with charts passed her without asking anything. Clara became invisible in a different way. Before, she was ignored because she was considered too small. Now, she was avoided because they seemed to think she was too big. And both hurt the same way. It was after lunch that Dr. Mark Jensen appeared. He was the resident doctor who had been in the corridor 2 days before, the one who had stopped at the back and observed everything in silence. Clara had noticed his gaze at that moment. It wasn't the gaze of someone merely watching, it was the gaze of someone remembering. He lightly knocked on the open door of the procedure room, where she was organizing supplies. "May I come in?" "Yes." He entered, carefully closed the door, stood with his hands in his lab, coat pockets. With that expression Clara still couldn't quite read. "I know who you are," he said. "Does everyone know now?" "No, I knew before." He paused. "I've known Gabriel for years. We studied together. When you joined the hospital, I recognized the surname. But I never said anything because you clearly didn't want people to know." Clara stopped what she was doing, turned to him. "Why are you telling me this now?" Mark took a deep breath. "Because there's a bigger problem than what you're seeing." He lowered his voice further. "Not for drama, but out of real necessity. Richard hired a lawyer last night. A lawyer I know by name, and it's not a good sign." Mark chose his words carefully. "This lawyer has a history of turning labor disputes into arguments of personal persecution. And the argument he's going to use is exactly what you're imagining. That Gabriel acted because of me, that Gabriel acted because of you, that the audit was motivated by personal issues, and that Richard's termination was within his authority as chief of staff." Mark looked at her. "If he can make the case revolve around your relationship, the audit loses strength. The irregularities they found become secondary, and Richard returns." The silence in the room became heavy. "There's more," Mark said. Clara closed her eyes for a second. "There are employees who have already signed statements for his lawyer. People who were in the corridor that day and are now saying that the termination was reasonable, that you had disobeyed orders before, that his behavior was proportionate. That's a lie. I know." He didn't avert his gaze. "But on paper, with the right signatures, it becomes a version, and version disputes with version." Clara remained quiet for a long moment, looked at her hands, then looked at him. "Why are you telling me this? What do you gain?" Mark didn't answer immediately. There was something on his face. Not guilt, but something close to it. "I was in that corridor," he finally said. "I saw what happened and I stood by." Pause. "I'm not going to stand by again." Clara left the hospital that afternoon with the weight of it all settled on her shoulders. 3 revelations in a single day. The leak of her identity, Richard's lawyer, the false testimonies, each one alone, would have been difficult to bear. The 3 together made the situation feel like a slowly closing trap. She called Gabriel on her way to the parking lot. He answered on the second ring. "I know," he said before she spoke. "You know about the lawyer. I found out this morning. And the testimonies?" A short pause. "Now I know." "Gabriel." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Can this undo everything?" He took a moment to reply, and the delay said what he didn't want to say in words. "There's a way," he said. "But I need you to trust me. I always have. This time it's different. This time I'm going to need you to do something that will be difficult." Clara stopped in the middle of the parking lot. The wind hit her face. "What?" "There's a meeting tomorrow. Richard's lawyer requested mediation before any formal proceedings. They want to sit down with the hospital management and propose an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "Richard returns to his position. The audit is suspended, and you receive compensation and are formally terminated with all your rights." Gabriel paused. "From their point of view, it's a clean proposal." "From their point of view." Clara stood still. "Are you telling me they want me to agree to be fired so he stays?" "I'm telling you that's what they'll propose tomorrow." "And you'll accept?" "No," he said, with a firmness she felt over the phone. "Never. But you need to be at this meeting." "Why?" "Because they don't know you'll be there. And when you walk into that room, the game will change. But it will only change in the right way if you can endure what they'll say before I can do anything." Clara clenched her teeth. "What will they say?" Gabriel was quiet, and that silence was the most honest answer he could have given. She didn't sleep. She lay there, looking at the ceiling, her head spinning, replaying everything Mark had said, every word from Gabriel, every sidelong glance she had received in the corridor that day. She thought about giving up, not on their marriage, not on Gabriel, but on all of it, on entering that meeting, on enduring another room full of people deciding what to do with her life, on standing there while someone calmly constructed lies and called them versions. She thought, "I've already proven what I needed to prove." But then she remembered the voices in the break room. She's been hiding in here like a spy. And she remembered the corridor, the pointed finger. Richard's voice echoing throughout the floor, while she clutched her clipboard hard enough not to tremble. She had left there with her head held high. She wouldn't enter a meeting room with her head bowed. In the early morning, she got up, went to the balcony. The apartment was quiet. Gabrielle slept. The city below pulsed at the slow rhythm of the small hours. She stood still, looking at the lights, and that's when her phone vibrated. A message, unknown number, no identification. If you enter that meeting tomorrow, I will show documents proving Gabrielle transferred ownership of 2 hospital floors to your name 8 months ago. It will look like everything was planned from the start, including you working here. Think carefully. Clara read it once, twice, 3 times. Her hands didn't tremble, but her heart accelerated in a way she felt even in her throat. Someone knew things that shouldn't be public. Someone was willing to use those things, and tomorrow was the meeting. She entered the bedroom, watched Gabrielle sleeping for a moment. There was so much she needed to say, ask, understand, but it was 3 a.m., and the meeting was at 9, and some questions once asked never went back. She lay down, her eyes open in the dark, and thought, tomorrow everything could end for good, or else. And this possibility was almost frightening. Tomorrow everything could change for good, and she still didn't know which of the two was more likely. Clara showed Gabriel the message at 6 a.m. He read it, reread it, placed the phone on the kitchen table with a calm she knew. It wasn't the calm of someone feeling nothing. It was the calm of someone feeling too much and having learned over the years not to show it. You knew about these documents, she asked. Gabriel looked at the phone for a moment, then at her. Yes. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences that week. It had weight. It had an edge. Explain, she said. He pulled out a chair, sat, placed his hands on the table, one over the other, the way he did when he was about to say something he had held back for too long. Months ago, when you told me you wanted to work at Maplewood General without anyone knowing who you were, I agreed. He spoke slowly, choosing each word. But I didn't stand still. I consulted a lawyer, and as a measure of asset protection, I transferred ownership of 2 hospital floors to your name. Clara remained still. Why? Because if someday someone tried to use your presence there against me, you would have legal standing to be there, not as a wife, but as a co-owner. He paused. I wanted you to be protected, even if I wasn't around. She looked at him for a long moment. You never told me. No, he didn't avert his gaze, because you would have refused. And it was true. She would have refused. Clara got up, went to the window. Outside, morning was beginning. The sky still heavy from the early hours, the streets empty. On one hand, there was something in it that warmed her inside. That silent gesture of protection, made without fanfare, without expecting thanks, without even telling her, the way Gabriel had always loved, quiet, firm, with his hands. On the other hand, there was the real and immediate problem. If this document comes to light in today's meeting, she said, without turning, Richard's lawyer will say, I was planted in the hospital, that it was a setup from the beginning, that the humiliation was provoked to justify the audit. He will say that, Gabriel confirmed. And people will believe it. They will. She turned to him. Whoever sent this message knows something that only people very close to you would know. This document isn't public. Gabriel nodded slowly. I know. Someone in your circle is feeding Richard's lawyer. I know, he repeated. And this time there was something different in his voice. Not surprise, something more akin to painful confirmation. And I already know who it is. The name Gabriel said was the last Clara expected to hear. Arthur Finch, minority shareholder of Maplewood General for 11 years. A man who had dined at their house, who had been at their wedding, whom Gabriel had defended in at least 2 situations Clara remembered. Arthur? She said, and the disbelief in her voice came out before she could stop it. He owns 15% of the hospital, Gabriel said, and for months he's been trying to increase that stake. I refused twice. Pause. Richard was his ally. If the audit brings down Richard, Arthur loses the only man inside the hospital who operated in his interests. Clara processed it. So, it's not just about me. It was never just about you. Gabriel stood up. You were the trigger, but what's beneath it is bigger. Arthur wants the hospital, and Richard was the piece he used to weaken the internal structure while waiting for the right moment. And the anonymous message was to scare me? So I wouldn't go to the meeting today, so you wouldn't go, or to go without knowing what I'd find? Gabriel looked at her. But now you know. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Maplewood General Administrative Headquarters on the 5th floor. Clara arrived 15 minutes early. Not with Gabriel, by her choice. She had asked to enter alone before him, without Richard's lawyer knowing she would be there. Gabriel had agreed, but the look he had when she left the apartment said everything he didn't say aloud. There was pride there, and there was that quiet fear of someone who loves someone who insists on going first. The boardroom was spacious, with glass walls facing the internal corridor. A long table, chairs around it, a pitcher of water in the center that no one would touch. Richard's lawyer was already there. His name was Mr. Vincent Price, 50 years old, well-cut suit, briefcase on the table, the expression of someone who had won many meetings and knew it. Beside him, Richard Sterling, not in the dark suit of the corridor, but in a lighter blazer, his expression controlled, but with something in his eyes that Clara recognized. It was nervousness disguised as confidence. He didn't expect her. Clara entered and sat on the opposite side of the table, without haste, without averting her gaze. She placed her bag on the chair next to her, crossed her hands on the table, and waited. Richard looked at her for a long second, then looked away. Mr. Price opened his briefcase. "We'll wait for Mr. Monty to begin," he said, with the voice of someone in control. "You can begin," Clara said. "He'll arrive shortly." "Mr." Price looked at her with an expression that was almost curiosity. "You are Clara Monty, a nurse at Maplewood General Hospital." A 1-second pause, and the owner's wife. Richard stiffened in his chair. "Mr." Price didn't stiffen, but something in his eyes changed. A quick, almost imperceptible recalibration. The kind of adjustment experienced lawyers make when the room isn't as they expected. "I understand," he said, and opened a second document inside his briefcase. The meeting began with Mr. Price presenting what he called a consensual resolution proposal. The language was clean, technical, designed to sound reasonable. Richard would be reinstated to his position with a contractual addendum that better formalized disciplinary limits. The audit would be suspended pending a confidentiality agreement. Clara would receive full compensation and formal termination with all employment rights. The proposal preserves the reputation of all parties, Mr. Price said, looking at Clara, and avoids a lawsuit that, let's be honest, could become quite inconvenient for the hospital's image. Clara listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, she remained quiet for a moment. "Just a moment. Inconvenient for whom?" she asked. Mr. Price offered a slight smile. "For everyone. Specifically," she said, "for Mr. Arthur Finch, who has a direct interest in this audit not happening." Mr. Price's smile didn't disappear, but it became fixed. The kind that's no longer spontaneous. Richard looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite classify. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to astonishment. The astonishment of someone who underestimated and is realizing it too late. The door to the room opened. Gabriel entered in a suit, no lab coat, with a briefcase, and a man beside him whom Clara didn't know. Older, white hair, serious expression. Later, Clara learned he was the senior legal counsel for the holding company that controlled Maplewood General. He had been summoned the day before. Gabriel greeted Mr. Price with a nod, looked at Richard for exactly 2 seconds, then looked at Clara, and in that look, there was a question and an answer at the same time. She was okay. He saw that she was okay. He sat beside her. The holding company's counsel opened his briefcase and placed 3 documents on the table. "Before any proposal can be considered," the counsel said, with the deliberate voice of someone in no hurry because he doesn't need to be, "we need to formalize what the audit has already identified so far." Mr. Price shifted in his chair. "The audit is suspended. Pending this agreement, isn't it?" The holding company's counsel replied, "Simply put, an audit is an internal process of the owning holding company. It cannot be suspended by agreement between external parties." Mr. Price opened his mouth, then closed it. "What have we found so far?" the counsel continued. "There are documented irregularities in 3 supply contracts, 2 reprimands issued without formal process, and an altered report dated 14 months ago." He looked at Richard. "Signed by you, sir." Richard remained motionless. "This is being analyzed by legal," Mr. Price said quickly, "and it's outside the scope of this meeting." "It is within the scope of this meeting," Gabriel said. It was the first time he spoke. His voice was low, firm, with no visible anger. "Because the proposal you presented asks for the suspension of the audit, and the audit found this. You can't separate them." Mr. Price looked at Gabriel for a moment, looked at the documents, looked at Clara, and for the first time since the meeting began, he said nothing. It was in that silence that Richard did the unexpected. Clara arrived early, worked in silence. never complained. Until the day the director pointed a finger in her face and screamed at her in front of everyone. What he didn't know would change everything. His finger was inches from her face. There was no warning, no justifiable reason, just that deep voice, that dark suit, and the entire hallway stopped and staring. "Get your things and get out, doctor." The meeting ended without an agreement. Mr. Price collected the documents, said he would be in touch, and left with Richard without looking back. Clara remained seated, looking at the empty table, listening to their footsteps fading down the corridor. Gabriel stood beside her. After the silence returned, he placed his hand over hers. She didn't remove it. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," he said. "But it's turned." She took a deep breath. For the first time in days, the air went all the way down, but deep down, something still constricted, because Arthur Finch hadn't appeared at that meeting, hadn't sent a representative, hadn't taken a stand. And people like Arthur, Clara had learned, didn't stay quiet because they had given up. They stayed quiet because they were planning their next move. That afternoon, Teresa called. "Clara, there's something happening here at the hospital you need to know." Her voice was different. It wasn't agitation. It was the tone of someone who saw something and wasn't sure if they should have. "What is it?" "Arthur Finch was here today at the hospital. He spoke with at least 4 department heads." Pause. "And by the end of the day, 2 of them resigned." Clara was quiet. "Which 2? Teresa said the names, and Clara felt her stomach churn, because one of those names was the person who had signed as a witness in the audit documents. Arthur hadn't given up. He was dismantling the pieces one by one, and the final confrontation, the one Clara had felt coming since the anonymous message that morning, was closer than she imagined. The summons arrived the next morning in writing, not for Clara, but for Arthur Finch. A formal letter from the holding company that owned Maplewood General Hospital, signed by the legal counsel, requesting mandatory attendance at an extraordinary general meeting in 48 hours. The reason described on the paper was dry, technical, almost bureaucratic. Review of contractual clauses regarding minority shareholding. But those familiar with that council's operations knew what it meant. It wasn't a review, it was a termination. Clara found out that morning when Gabriel placed a copy of the letter on the breakfast table. She read it, put the paper aside, picked up her cup. "When did you prepare this?" she asked. "Months ago," he replied. "Since I realized what Arthur was doing." Pause. "I was just waiting for the right moment to act. And the right moment was now. The right moment was when he sent that message to you in the early morning." Gabriel's voice was different in this part, lower, harder. "When he came after you, he crossed a line that had nothing to do with business." Clara stared at her cup. There was something in it that moved her inside in a way she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just gratitude, it was the feeling of being completely seen, without needing to explain, without needing to ask, the kind of thing some people spend their whole lives looking for and never find. She had found it in a man who hadn't even told her what he was doing, because he knew she didn't need to know to be safe. She was safe anyway. The assembly happened 2 days later, in a room Clara didn't know, on the administrative floor of the holding company, in a commercial building 3 blocks from the hospital. She didn't go. It wasn't her place at that moment. She stayed at the hospital, worked her entire shift, checked charts, organized schedules, resolved a medication issue the pharmacy had missed. She did everything as she always did, with the same silent competence as always, without expecting anyone to notice. But this time someone did. Teresa stayed close by throughout the shift, not invasively, but present, with that look of someone who wants to say something and is still choosing the time. The time came during the break. They were in the break room, just the 2 of them, when Teresa placed her coffee on the table and stood with her back to the window. "I need to tell you something," she began. "Teresa, let me finish." She took a deep breath. "When that happened in the corridor, I went after you. I said it was unfair. But before that, before following you, I stood there for a while, watching." She paused. "And I hate myself for it." Clara was quiet. "You stood up alone." Teresa continued, her voice smaller now. "And I should have been by your side much sooner." Clara looked at her for a long moment. She saw the genuine guilt on that face, the real shame of someone who had weighed the risk before acting and knew it. "You went," Clara finally said. "It might have taken time, but you went. It wasn't enough. Sometimes it isn't." Clara picked up her cup. "But you went." Teresa quickly wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her hand, as if she didn't want it to show. And Clara pretended not to see, because there was dignity in that too. The news of the assembly reached the hospital before the end of the shift. Not officially. It arrived the way news arrives in hospitals, by word of mouth, by message, crossing corridors and nursing stations, and waiting rooms until it reached everywhere at once. Arthur Finch had lost his shareholding due to breach of conduct clause and documented conflict of interest. Immediate departure. No negotiation. No shareholder compensation. His name had been removed from all Maplewood General documents that same afternoon, and Richard Sterling had received, through legal counsel, formal notification of termination for just cause, not suspension, not leave, but termination, with all the grounds listed, the audit irregularities, the illegal reprimands, the documented conduct in the corridor with images and testimony. 23 years at the hospital ended on a 2-page document. He turned to Clara, not to Gabriel, but to her, and said in a voice that had lost all the volume of the corridor, "I didn't know who you were." Clara looked at him. "I know," she replied. "If I had known, if you had known, you wouldn't have yelled at me in front of everyone," she said slowly. "Or would you have yelled more quietly?" Richard was speechless. And that was the point. Not whether he knew who she was, but what he did to people he thought were nobodies. During all of it, Clara looked at her. She was young, probably around 23, with her badge crooked and an expression that mixed admiration with genuine confusion. "I wasn't calm," Clara replied. "I held on." "What's the difference?" "Calm is not feeling." Clara adjusted the clipboard under her arm. Holding on is feeling everything and still standing. The girl was quiet, processing, and there was something in that look that Clara recognized, the look of someone who had just heard something they would carry for a long time. Gabriel arrived at the hospital at the end of the afternoon. It wasn't planned. She didn't expect him, but when she looked up from the nursing station and saw him standing at the beginning of the corridor, in a suit, unhurried, waiting for her to finish what she was doing, something in her chest loosened in a way she hadn't been able to loosen since that morning in the corridor, with Richard's finger pointed at her face. She finished her notation, handed the clipboard to Teresa, and walked towards him. They stopped in the corridor, the same cold, bluish light, the same glass walls at the back. Only this time, no one was yelling, no finger was pointed, no sidelong glances were trying to calculate who she was. There were just the two of them standing in the middle of the corridor that had tried to diminish her. "It's over," he said. "It's over," she repeated. He looked at her with that gaze she knew better than any words. The gaze of someone who had seen everything, held everything, and could now let it show. "You knew," she said slowly, "that I would endure. I always knew." "How?" he thought for a second. "Because you didn't hold on for me." He paused briefly. "You held on because that's who you are." Clara felt the tears come. Not the quick hot tears of the parking lot the day she had left through the back door with her badge in her bag. These were different, slower, deeper. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. But there was one thing that still needed to be done. She had known it since the night of the anonymous message, perhaps even before. "Gabriel," she said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. "I can't keep working here." He was quiet. Not out of surprise, but out of listening. "Not because they fired me, not because I'm afraid." She chose her words carefully. "But because now everyone knows who I am, and as long as I'm in this corridor in uniform, there will always be someone who will look at me and won't see the nurse, they'll see the owner's wife." Pause. "And I've worked too hard to be taken seriously for what I do, not for what I have." Gabriel looked at her. "So, what do you want to do?" "I want to finish the specialization course. I paused when we got married." She took a deep breath. "I want to go back to working somewhere where no one knows my last name, where I have to prove who I am solely by what I do. That will take time. I know. It will be difficult. I know that too." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. There was something on his face, not resistance. It was the expression of someone digesting a choice that wasn't his, made by someone he respected too much to dispute. "Okay," he finally said. And those two words, simple, without drama, without negotiation, were the most beautiful she had heard in weeks. She took off her badge, didn't throw it, didn't put it in her bag, as on that day in the locker room, laden with pain and silence. She held it in her hand for a moment. "Clara Monte, nurse, Maplewood General Hospital." Then she carefully placed it on the counter of the nursing station. She looked at Teresa, who stood there, who had seen everything, who had remained motionless in a corridor, and then crossed the entire hospital to be by her side when it mattered. "Take care of this floor," Clara said. Teresa nodded, unable to speak. She just nodded, her eyes shining with that expression of someone preserving a moment for the rest of their life. Clara and Gabriel walked out through the main corridor, not through the back door, not through the side parking lot, away from the cameras, away from the stairs, but through the main corridor, the busiest in the hospital, the same corridor of humiliation, of the voice that had echoed through the walls, of the pointed finger, of the silence of everyone who had remained motionless, not knowing what to do. They walked side by side, unhurried, without pretense. Some employees looked, some recognized, some averted their gaze, some didn't. And in these last ones, there was a different look than before, not of fear, not of calculation. It was the look of someone who had seen a woman be brought down and seen the same woman rise again, and had learned something from it. Clara didn't look sideways. She looked ahead, pushed open the exit door. The sun hit her face, and this time she didn't cry. She just breathed deeply, fully, freely, and walked. Richard Sterling, Chief of Staff at Maplewood General Hospital, yelled, not caring who was listening. "You're not fit to work here. Never were." Clara Monte didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't cry. She stood still, her clipboard clutched to her chest, eyes downcast, jaw clenched. Inside, something tore. Outside, she let nothing show. And that was precisely what further enraged Dr. Sterling. But the humiliation in the hallway hadn't been the first bad thing that day. Clara was in the third-floor corridor when the news reached her. A young technician, who barely knew her, stopped beside her and said in a low voice, with wide eyes, "Did you hear? Richard was actually fired, with just cause." Clara nodded. "Did you hear about Arthur Finch?" "I heard that too." The technician looked at her for a second, as if trying to piece things together, as if she wanted to ask something but didn't know how to formulate it. "How did you stay so calm?" the girl finally said.